imagine, I was there, the Attorney General, Ferguson was there, was the keynote speaker to open off the conference, and everybody had anxiety the next day. So I took a few minutes to speak to the group and said, well, I know we're frustrated and disappointed, but not shocked. So I think it could have been a lot worse. They could have not only rescinded the Cole Memorandum, but they could have replaced it and told the U.S. states to move forward in closing down the businesses. So to be totally honest with you, not sure why it took a whole year to rescind a memo, but we've been waiting for the Obama administration, for the Trump administration to give us some guidance around that. So I basically say stay calm. The Attorney General and our governor and several legislators from both parties had a press conference the next day stating that they would defend the state law. So I think from our point of view, we continue to use the guidance of the Cole Memorandum. We're not walking away from that, even if others are.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that Sessions said it gives more authority and power to the state's district attorneys, and thus far, state of Washington's district attorney supporting the state and their rollout?
Well, to be honest with you, for years we just haven't had much of a communication because we've used the Cole Memo. So really, I think like our states and others, we're reaching out to our acting U.S. attorneys because we don't have appointees of the new administration right now to sit down with them and walk through the story that we've given to our congressional delegation that we met with last year and that we're also meeting with in the next couple months to talk about help that they can give us with respect to the federal government. But we continue to now reach out to those U.S. attorneys, just like many of the states, like Oregon is, to make sure we have that conversation.
All right, Steve, Billy, where are the combos? How are they going?
Well, so first, the Cole Memo went away. I don't see a change in our policies. A lot of the provisions of Cole Memo are enshrined in Oregon law and our sets of regulations. So clearly, that's still going to be a focal point for our regulatory structure here in Oregon. And that we've worked on enforcement now. We've had criminal activity, and we've already coordinated with law enforcement and the U.S. Attorney's Office along the way on those big cases that involve criminal activity. I don't see a change in the focus of the U.S. Attorney on criminal activity, but the summit is very encouraging to me because he's taken the time to get educated about what's happening on the ground here in Oregon. I think he's interested to learn in areas that they haven't had much experience with because they didn't know what they were doing as well with the lack of decision making on rescission and direction from the Trump administration. Now I think they've got some autonomy within each region to take a look at what's happening, and I very much appreciate the approach that U.S. Attorney Bill Williams is taking. I think the summit's going to be a good thing for the state. I think we've got a great educational opportunity there, but they're not going to lose their focus on going after criminal activity.
Yeah, so in your conversations thus far, the focus has remained if you're diverting product to the illegal market, or if you're just plain operating an illegal market, that's bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're being legal, if you're following the rules and you're being compliant with CD sale tracking, the OLCC framework, nothing has changed. No focus change. That didn't change anything from his perspective.
No focus change there, but I think you all read his editorial where he was focused on how much supply we're generating. Not just his problem for all of us in this industry right now about how that plus supply is going to be consumed, what happens with the economics, what the pressure is on for diversion from that.
So what I hear as a licensee is if you grew it in the legal market, if it's tracked in the legal market, if you're a legal licensee, the worst thing that we could do as an industry is take product that was produced legally and divert it. People that are doing that should expect to have penalties. As always, it's against the law. But people that are keeping it inside the market, there might be price reductions, there may be product that goes bad, lots of things could happen to that. But we as an industry need to give confidence to the OLCC as well as the U.S. District Attorney that product that's inside the market will be dealt with appropriately and it won't be diverted out. That's the worst thing that we can do. A couple bad actors could change the focus to the industry that is legal, which we all have our addresses and phone numbers and contact information. It's easier for them to find us. So everything we can do to be better at that is important. And so you addressed, go ahead.
And I just follow up on that, and this is kind of getting on the downside of the industry right now, but you know, as welcoming as we were in bringing people in and getting them into the system and trying to make the licensing process as penetrable as possible, one of the flip sides of that is we're going to have to help you when you need to unwind, when you decide you need to get out of the business and figure out ways to get those inventories down and how we can help you get to that point to make it easier to turn in your license if you need to, if you're at that point where you're at the tipping scale and you need to get out and have this product in the market. We've got to help you get that product out of your business and into places in our legal system where it should be. We've had companies that have destroyed their product just to get out cleanly right now, and that's what they wanted to do. They have that ethic about the system and not taking the product and skipping it elsewhere in the world here. So we want to work on that too, just to make sure that, you know, as you do unwind, that you can do so readily for those that need to.
Yep, absolutely. So that jumps me to something that happened that Ricky mentioned earlier, maybe someone has heard about, minor decoy system from a compliance checks that we've done in Oregon. We went out. Minor decoy system, for everybody that knows, is someone goes out that's under 21, tries to purchase product from a licensed retailer. They have an ID that says they're under 21. It has a big red box on it in Oregon that says, I'm under 21. They're not trying to trick anybody. That was my first question is, are they really crafty fake IDs with guys with long beards looking like they're 35? And it looks like a child with an ID that says I am a child under 21. And we didn't do so great. And Ricky said that's to be expected to some degree for a very new industry. We have to be better. That is one of the things, man, if we as an industry fail at continuously, is going to draw a lot of undue attention. Do you guys agree? So, Rick, can you speak to that, how that went in Washington? You guys had to start, how long did it take you to really start doing those kind of minor decoys? Do you do them now?
Well, we do at least 3 to 4 visits a year. But when we initially did it, we saw the same results because no one had ever done compliance checks for these retailers. So it kind of made sense. In Washington, it's a vertical ID. If you're 21, it's a horizontal ID. So it wasn't really hard to know that you're looking at a piece of ID that says the individual is likely to be under 21. But again, just for the experience of it, it didn't take long for the industry to understand that this is problematic. We've got to make sure. We go right back in. If there's a sale, we'll be back in within 3 months to see if folks have learned how to do that. And a lot of times it means we're doing training again with the employees there to help them. But I wasn't really surprised to see the numbers, though I read the reports that people were very concerned. Well, I think they should be concerned, but you should understand. Maybe 50 or 60% would have been alarming. You were still high, even for the first compliance checks you'd ever seen. It will get better. I mean, that's what I keep telling Steve, because that was our experience. And that's the experience of the other states.
Rick's been through it, but I'm not as ready to forgive or forget or not to follow through. We're in that stage of compliance now where you got to perform, and I can tell you there has been nothing more damaging than that poor report on the minor ID checks. Your friends in government are really, really disappointed. And we had pockets that were well below 50%. Portland metropolitan area was abysmal. And we got to get that together. I mean, there's a colored, coloring around the box of the picture right there. So this is a visual thing. This is just lack of training, lack of willingness to follow through. You know, when we started this, we wanted to do ID checking at the door. That was a bill, and that didn't happen, so that no one under 21 or 18, if you got your medical card, could get in. That would have helped with your compliance. So we have help that we can give you to get into compliance. We want to help you be in compliance, but I can't tell you how much immediate pressure that I felt from the political leadership of the state when those statistics came out. They want changes. They don't like our penalty schedule, and they're very excited about it. So this is a case study for all of the next things that are going to roll out for us, because we really haven't done full retail checking yet. We haven't had those procedures in place. We're never going to get into labs really until maybe the tail end of this process when we're doing more complete audits and inspections. But all those things are coming. I think we've been good through the bulletins of telling you, expect this, expect that, get ready for this, and laying it out. I mean, we've sent out through our bulletins before the December minor decoy checks, you know, it's coming. It came, and we didn't do so well. So I know we're gonna get better, but I'm frustrated by it. I thought we were ahead of the game in them. And our commission is going to be considering some actions. I don't know what they'll take, but they're disappointed.
And we had a chance to talk last night, and it was very apparent that both Rick and Steve, that your intentions are to help the industry be better. It is not to say gotcha. And that's a big deal as a licensee that's coming in, the OCC, the WLCB, are coming in to actually help us maintain compliance, to keep focus off the regulated industry, undue focus off the regulated industry, and help us be better. And so it is important, extremely important, that everyone's compliant. And you guys and your agencies are doing everything you can to help and willing to help in any way to maintain.
You know, and the real human consequence of not having that training, I mean, the worker has a worker permit, and you know, they're potentially going to lose that. They get fired, you know, a bunch of those that failed fired their workers and failed to do checks. I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong on the alcohol side. We go through that, and it's, you know, whether there's remedial training, and that's where we should be. But you got Schedule 1 drug, we're rolling out a new system. This is the simplest of things to make happen right, and we need to make it happen right.
I remember there was some surprise when we began our first compliance checks, and we talked about it last night. We actually sent letters to all the retailers telling them we were coming. We also did press releases to the media and said, we're coming. And they said, why would you do that? Well, because we want voluntary compliance. We're not there to stick the retailer. We just want you to make sure you're checking ID. And that probably had something to do, but I think Oregon did the same thing. But to your point, I think we're trying to get voluntary compliance without having to write violations.
Hey, you guys, your agency exists and gets money when the industry is successful. That's just growing and thriving. There is no purpose, and that's a theme that I always get, and I try to tell everybody every time I get a public forum to do it, is the OCC and the Liquor Control Board in Washington is here to support the industry and help it move forward the best that it can. And there's rules and guidelines that we all need to follow because of that. So that kind of brings me to my next topic. Some people think there's too much product in Oregon right now. I don't know why. It could cause some concern, right? I'm imagining outside of the minor decoy, there's going to be increased compliance checks on where that product goes. Once it enters into the metric system, it's legal, it's grown, produced, where does it end up? That's really, really important. The next worst thing that could happen outside of selling to minors is a bunch of legal product in Kansas that was produced in Oregon. So, Rick, I mean, what did you guys do originally? Did you see that much of an issue of overproduction early on?
Of course not, because we learned. And so it's back to this gold rush mentality that occurred 5 years ago, as it did in most of the states with legalization. I don't think people recognize how bumpy the ride would be and how it continues to be bumpy, given that you've got this violation of federal law. So you create a system that's so restrictive, and I recognize so expensive for the industry. You know,
You didn't have the same issue that we're having right now in Oregon.
Well, we did initially because we started with the producer licenses in March and we issued retail licenses in July, and guess what happened? We had an undersupply. So what did we learn from that? We should have given at least 6 months to 9 months before we opened our first retail shops. So I suspect there was an oversupply in Oregon and Washington before legalization. And the reason I bring that up is, remember, it takes time to move toward a legal marketplace. It's not going to happen overnight. So you're going to have illegal grows, you're going to have oversupply of the system as you come to realize and understand the supply and demand for that marketplace. And it's very difficult for us to deal with. But that's the same crying queue in Washington right now. There's an oversupply. So we actually reached out. Initially, when we began, we knew nothing. There was very little out there with respect to cannabis. Remember, Colorado was the only state that had a regulated medical marketplace. We even went to Europe thinking, well, we're going to find out how to regulate cannabis in Europe. Absolutely not. No one regulates cannabis in Europe. They decriminalize it, but there was no one out there but Colorado. We spent that was a group of 25 in Washington, 25 in Colorado that met once every 2 weeks for hours. We learned everything that we could from Colorado. And then we hired Dr. Mark Kleinman, Dr. Bo Kilmer with the Rand Corporation, Botech, Angela Hawkins and Jonathan Calkins. These are people that are known all over the country as experts in drug policy around cannabis. We hired them and subcontract with them to help us understand. They actually surveyed by city and county in our state what is the consumption rate for cannabis for folks over 21. That's how we built our system, to try to make sure that we weren't diverting or oversupply in Washington. And it was bumpy to begin with, but we would have never thought after 3 years, so 3.5 years in retail. Our first year, 250 million in sales. Our second year, 800 million in sales. Last year, 1.3 billion in sales. 700 million in excise taxes being collected for the state. I'll give you an example, because as you heard earlier, we were a control state for spirits. Spirit sales in 2011 were about 800 million. Cannabis sales in Washington are 1.3 billion. And alcohol sales in Washington are about 3 billion a year. So you can see, we never, in fact, the estimates fiscally for how the industry would grow or what the revenue was about 1/3 to 1/2 of what we've collected. So it's a robust, it's a big industry in Washington. I think finally, because we've ended, look how long it's taken, we've ended the allowance for new licenses for producers, processors, and retailers, that we're actually starting to stabilize as far as sales.
So I hear two things with that. A lot of tax revenue builds the confidence in the state to keep that going. That tax revenue is put to work in a lot of great ways. But quick question for you. Do you see Washington opening up its canopy limits and or allowing out of state in the near future?
Well, I don't see us opening canopy because there's so much concern in Washington this year that there's too much canopy, that the price of cannabis is now really close to what you showed me this morning, Steve, as far as about $6 average per gram. And I'm hearing the same concerns in Oregon that I'm hearing in Washington today. So I don't suspect we're going to open up the canopy at all.
Okay, Steve, your turn. As far as the number of licenses, what's the OLCC's perspective on how do they help? Do you let it figure itself out? Do you cap it? What are your thoughts?
The OLCC doesn't have a definitive position on caps versus letting the market run. And I personally think we were set up as open market, qualifications based. I think we should deal with it on that basis. That might be a bit messier for this agency and enforcement deal, because we could surely button it up and make a nice, neat recreational medical consumer market inside the OLCC with caps and restrictions. Policymakers are going to think about that, and I think there's an equitable debate there about which way the state could go. It certainly would be a quick, easy solution to put a cap on, but where would you put it? You know, are you going to take in just those people who got in today, moratorium? Are you going to put in all those folks that have submitted a license, or the 3,000 that are in the queue, and give them an opportunity? Are you going to extend it to these folks that have declared an OHA that are going to come up? Pretty soon that number gets large enough that it's meaningless, and I think the politics drive us to a larger number. So I'm not sure that caps will be effective even if we do them.
Right. So your stance, you're leaning towards it not making sense to obviously cap it and let the market figure it out.
That is not an OLCC position. That's an analysis.
So one of the things that Washington does that's say better, data to the market. Oregon, this is their first major year of production, and data is incredibly helpful for us as we're trying to build our business model. So Washington releases a lot of data. Oregon is starting to release data. That data would allow the industry to analyze the amount of product that's being produced and make strategic business decisions based on that. You see Oregon moving in a direction where they're like, we want to release as much data as possible, or it'll draw flaws around that. What can we reasonably expect?
So I think I'm sure we're gonna move in the realm of more transparency with our data. We're getting better at it. The data is starting to clean up some too, because it was not very meaningful, still not entirely meaningful what we have in the system yet today. But I hope that we move in that direction. Our new chairman Paul Rosenbaum actually has an experience with a little company that's nationwide, that Rentrack, that monitors all of your viewing on set-top boxes on TV. He understands data really well. So I think, he needs some time to get in and experience what he thinks we should be in terms of a data producer. But I think we're going to get there and put more and more and more data out, and I hope that you see that in the coming future. I don't think we're going to jump suddenly and do a lot of things, because I think we need to work with work with the other states right now, because there's some parameters as we share data, how we define it, how we look at it, that are really helping us think about establishing the long-term parameters for best practices and management of marijuana in Oregon, or across the country actually, in terms of what our standards are. So I wouldn't expect to see a lot of changes immediately, but then again, there are some things we're required to do. We have to put out a supply report. We're going to do that before the 19th session. So some of the indeterminate questions we got about 4 million pounds of wet weight, and maybe when it's dry, 683 pounds annually of dry weight. These are numbers these are estimates that aren't certified estimates, right? We're working through to figure out how we use this and what's meaningful in the calculations when we put out information. But we're going to have to report to the legislature on supply. It's one thing the federal government is interested in seeing us follow through and do. There's that confusing part between wet and dry that's pretty confounding. How much is going to extracts? How much extracts on extracts to edibles? We got a growing market. We have new market entrants coming in Oregon. More and more medical folks are utilizing our system. And because of the less retail on the medical side, I think we're going to see some growth there. So how much of this can be consumed? What's its ultimate product mix? We're going to get a full cycle, in the coming year, which I think we'll have a good set of data to take a look at, and we'll be able to see from fall harvest to all the way through a good cycle of data, how all of that harvest translates into products and supply in our system. So more to come.
Yeah, they're legal. Okay.
Well, it's kind of interesting that what I've learned is our public disclosure laws are very different in the states. So Washington's referred to as the Sunshine Law, which means there's not much that's protected. In other words, the reason why data is available, not only in the system, but with respect to our licensees, enforcement violations that are issued, all of that information is available on our website. I'm sure for a lot in the industry that's concerning, but at the same time it makes us better understand, and others understand, what our marketplace looks like. But a lot of the restrictions, I think Oregon's kind of in the other direction. They're looking to protect public information in our state. We don't have much that we can do about that other than provide that information. But as an example, that's one of the reasons why we have had more success in banking, is that information, our retailers sign a waiver that allows us to provide the licensing file to the banks, to the credit unions. By doing that, we've done a criminal background check. We found out a financial investigation where the money came from. That gives or removes some of the anxiety that the banking industry has in our state, because we provide that information. They also have the ability to ask for a monthly report of any of what's going on with the licensee, what's being reported through the traceability system. They look at what's happening in the account that they hold with that particular licensee to make sure that they can account for it. I'll be honest with you, and I think that's the biggest reason why we've had success in our state with banking.
It doesn't seem like the industry in Washington, it seems like in Oregon we're really opposed, and we were going through the data and what was public and what was not, really opposed to it, because there is security risk there.
Right.
But the state of Washington, the way that you release the data, is the industry angry about
well,
it?
I don't know if they'd be angry. I'd be concerned about it, because you can go into our system and find out exactly where a licensee address is, for example, and I can go in there and see what your sales are. But I think everybody recognizes, because early on we shared that, there's not anything we can do about that.
And there hasn't been a bunch of negative repercussions because that data is
not that I'm aware of.
And so the state of Oregon, what are the laws around it? Like you said, the actual disclosure laws. What can you and can't you release legally versus what you want
the big primary thing is landowner name affiliation with the property, right? We want that protected. You know, and Senator Przansky got the names of individuals, you know, not being able to keep records at retail on individual sales as much. So we lost some data in the consumption. I'd say we're in the middle. We do have to disclose a lot. If you ask us for the records, we'll have to provide them. We make an evaluation then about whether what box needs to be checked. The only ones we consider are security, and I'm not sure that I've seen us deny any particular information, but landowner information on those by that. So there's a lot available. We haven't put it out systemically. You're going to start seeing more dashboards and compilations of our movement through metric here in the near future.
So it's about getting the infrastructure set up and the ability to give data that makes sense.
Yep.
Because dry weight is not meaning usable weight. There's sticks, there's family, if everything goes through, how much of that actually is usable. So that's good data to get eventually. So you're working on it, you can do it, it will be coming out. It's just a matter of prioritizing that and get that on the list. Okay, a couple minutes left. Quick question, hemp. How is the OLCC dealing with hemp, getting into the market? Can you talk about that for a couple minutes?
Well, you know, I'd say this, in the last year and a half, I haven't seen, maybe a little less than that last year, in our final rulemakings, I haven't seen many members of the marijuana community in when we're doing rules. I see the hemp folks in droves. They're concerned, they want penetration to our retail licensing market. You know, we started off saying they could and do the packaging. They expected to come in, and then our rules backed off. Our commission made a decision to let them in without being in the metric tracking system. New federal requirements were out there around hemp and the consumption of human consumption. New legislation was passed, so now we've let hemp come into our system through processors as required by law. There's legislation pending that would allow, excuse me, the tracking of marijuana and metric right off of the site. You designate your hemp coming in, it would be entered in the metric, and it would proceed through as tracked. I think that would entail also a clear stream for hemp, being very distinct from the marijuana inside our system. Maybe its own symbols, certainly its own packaging, and making it a separate stream. This is going to be this is an industry problem in the competition. We've tended to favor those that are paying for our system, the marijuana producers or the hemp producers, and you know, the marijuana producers have paid the freight on our system and have imposed, you know, have met our security requirements on the ground. Hemp producers haven't had that. Now it's less dangerous, maybe that's too much, but they have access to a completely different market than our market. So we've staked out one part of the scope. I don't think the industry, the legislature, everyone has a handle on how that's going to come together in the retail marketplace across the spectrum, not just in our shops. So, and it's a difficult question to solve in one fell swoop. We put a marker in. I think everyone's pivoting off that. But you know, it's going to be an enforcement problem for Oregon too. You know, this whole grow issue is very confounding with our growers of marijuana and whose grow is what and where and how much product. Hemp can be exported. People are worried about diversion of marijuana and the hemp exportation. It's a possibility. It's certainly a lot of bulk product. Looks the same, smells a lot the same. You know, it makes for tough enforcement. So it's going to be a tough issue.
So, in 1 minute or less as we're wrapping up, Washington's
So can I talk about hemp for a minute?
Oh yeah.
So we don't regulate hemp, the LCB, it's Department of Ag, but I actually got a kick out of the fact how times are changing. This is a shampoo from the Red Lion here on the river, and it says hemp and lemon shampoo.
Well, there you go. All right.
It didn't say 12% THC.
Yeah, 12% THC. Yeah. Okay, so quick bullet point format. What's the focus? You know, top 3 focus for Washington that you guys are going to focus on over the next 12 months? Is rules, session, legislation, or is it?
I think a couple of rule changes that we're looking at, packaging and labeling, for example, pretty strict regulations initially, We're taking a look at that and coming out in the probably next month with changes to that, make it a little easier for the industry. I think it's interesting that it's legislative day today for the credit unions in Washington, and they're going up on the Hill. And one of the three big issues for them is continuing to have the state assistance in banking. So we're watching that closely, and then we're continuing to work with cities and counties. We have bans and moratorias in our state, and it was pretty problematic initially because the initiative didn't speak to whether cities and counties could impose bans and moratorias. So we went to the Attorney General to ask for an opinion, and unfortunately the opinion was because the initiative was silent on bans and moratorias, cities and counties, you can impose them. Yet at the same time they told the LCB, because it was silent and someone meets the licensing requirements, which doesn't have anything to do with bans or moratorias, you've got to issue a license in the city and county if a city and county imposes a ban or moratorium. You can imagine how popular the state was when we issued licenses in cities and counties that had bans and moratoriums. A real frustration for that. And actually we even would have supported the ability for cities and counties to be able to veto that because there was so much consternation and people were so upset as far as cities and counties that we would issue license in defiance of their bans and moratoriums. But again, the legislature wouldn't move there.
Yeah. Right.
Enforcement, training, and compliance. I mean, that's, we're in that mode now. We want to work with you as we go forward in that. We will. We're going to have educational sections on the new rules that have been adopted and changes you got to be aware of. I think the legislative session, there's definitely, and it's not necessarily with our agency, I think there is a push and a need to look at overall enforcement resources in the state of Oregon. I think the governor and legislature are interested in that. I'm not sure how they're going to finance that. I don't particularly think that all of that needs to be financed on the backs of our system or our fees, and that some of that should perhaps come out of the tax dollars we're generating. We've stood up an industry with you that at the end of this biennium and toll rule is going to, from startup to now, is going to generate $210 million. So there's some dollars there to invest in making the enforcement system better, to invest in making our services better, which is another piece of the equation. We got to get our licensing system working better with renewals. We're out doing the trainings and the clinics to make that happen quicker. If you haven't renewed, get renewed. But we're working on the services that we provide you as well, and from an IT perspective, is a big part of our next focus.
Love it. Well, the better funding you guys can get, the smoother the industry will be in the regulation and the faster we can continue to move forward. So, thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your assistance.